remind you that we have 2 webinars coming up very soon at Renegade University. The first is selling out fast, so I urge you, if you're interested, to get your tickets now. That is Postmodernism, Critical Theory, and American Politics, co-taught by me and James Lindsay. Go to renegadeuniversity.com to get your tickets for that. Now we're going to have to cap it soon because we want to have an intimate learning experience for everyone who takes that webinar. The second one immediately follows that, begins on January 26th. This is Talkin' Shit, the history of hip-hop with the great Kamasi Hill. So go to renegadeuniversity.com, get your tickets for those webinars now. Hope to see you soon. Thank you. This is the Unregistered Podcast, and I'm Thaddeus Russel. This is a show about ideas, people, and behaviors that are considered inappropriate, out of bounds, or beyond the pale. The things you're not supposed to talk about if you're a school teacher, a college professor, a businessman, a politician, a parent, a neighbor, or even a podcast host. These are the things you're not supposed to say or even think if you're a good liberal, a good conservative, or a good citizen. Each week, I'll interview a person who has something bad to say. They might be a journalist or a professor. They might be a porn star or a drug dealer. They might just be an ordinary person with an ordinary job who doesn't care about the rules of polite society. I'm not interested in breaking the rules just to be a troublemaker. I'm interested in people who break the rules of conventional thought and to expand the scope of what is possible to say in our society. I'm interested in people who make me think. I want unregistered listeners to rethink everything. That's why I had this week's guest back on the show. This is my interview with Curtis Yarvin. I am joined from an undisclosed location, once again, somewhere in the West, that's all we're going to say here, by the great master of political theory, philosophy, and unique opinions, Curtis Yarvin. Thanks for coming back on. I want to tell you something. I don't think I told you this. Your episode on Unregistered from April is the most downloaded and most viewed episode in the history of this show. And
wow, that's impressive. Thank you for having me on again, Thaddeus. April seems like a long time ago.
Yeah, your hair is a lot longer.
It is. I have the full COVID hair now. I've been compared not unfavorably, I believe, to a Whitesnake roadie. And if you remember the great, I mean, you look like you're about the same age as me, Thaddeus, maybe a little older. So you probably remember the great '80s band Whitesnake. And,
yeah, I think
I'm rocking the look. I'm told.
That's nice. I think I'm a lot older than you, but we don't have to get into that. Well, so you've been writing quite a bit on Substack, on Gray Mirror, which is your blog.
I have, and actually, you know, I'm delighted to announce that last time I checked, I was actually on the Substack Politics leaderboard. Whoa. So I'm never going to be competing with the Iglesiases of the world, but last time I checked, and I'm going to slip down it surely, but I'm just an early adopter. I'm not really a VIP, but last I checked, I was number 15.
Wow.
Which, is basically entitles me to a very junior engineer's salary. And, still, it feels like being a professional writer. I'm not sure how long it'll last because, the winds of fortune are always changing. Mm-hmm. But, so far it's been fun, serializing the book on there. And the book is actually, it's appearing a little more, I had sort of hoped to do a more traditional kind of blog output where I'd write 1,000 words, every few days. And instead people seem to be getting 20,000 words every month and a half, which kind of sucks. But, I'm trying to improve that. I'm trying to serialize my chapters now. Graymirror.substack.com. And by the way, also my past stuff has not been, the chapters have not been paywalled, but moving forward, they're going to be paywalled, mostly because the stuff that I've posted up till now is mostly, until the last one, really recapitulations of stuff that I was blogging about 10 years ago, but now we're starting to see new and very funky material. And I think it's, I'm not sure, honestly. Number one, I have to set the hook, as a drifter. And number two, I'm not sure the public is ready for some of this material. It's not that it's politically incorrect, really. It's just wild. And so, it's not too late for you to be among the first dear unregistered listeners, to get this in your inbox. So that's my ad. And yeah, so thank you for having me on. It's a great pleasure, and I'm happy to talk about almost anything you want to talk about.
Great. Okay. Yeah. Well, so, everybody's been talking about the election and COVID virtually nonstop for many, many months now. But no one has talked about it in the ways that you have, those things. And I guess I would like to, let's just do that. Let's get the courtesy.
All right. Should we have the COVID retrospective?
Yes,
now
sir.
that we're sort of the end of the drama is sort of nearly appearing. Well, I'm among, you can go out on the internet and you can find that the first people who understood that COVID was a thing were basically politically indescribable weirdos on the internet, and I would maybe count myself among that, in that category. I mean, I could describe myself, but not quickly, right? But well, I mean, I can just say I'm a monarchist, but but an absolute monarchist. But in any case, so I was hearing about this COVID thing, and then it started to get my attention because, I'm sort of plugged into the Undernews here, and this was in January. And so in January, I was in the odd position of, I did a couple of different things. One is I went to the local casino and placed a bet on COVID. And the other thing that I did, I bought COVID puts, basically, which puts you in a really fucked up position because basically, here you are, nobody's heard about this thing, and you're out there like, you're talking your book. Right. So you're betting on this virus, and you basically, a man will grow to love anything that he puts his money on. Right. And so you're just like, come on, kill. It's really like, obviously your forebrain this is the tendency of your hindbrain, which is a wholly kind of savage carnivorous thing. And your forebrain is, of course, fighting this, it's trying to be decent and philosophical. But, something in your hindbrain is like, you're watching that line go up and you're like, yeah. And then, the funny thing, of course, is you bet on this in January, and and then you're like, well, I mean, how can you anticipate the modern flow of modern financial market, right? You can't, except you can. And, even when this thing was becoming clearly a visible, relevant thing in China, the market keeps going up and up and up, right? And the amount that I put on this was derisory, right? And it was a small bet, right? and it keeps going up and up and up, and you're just like, what is going on? And I talked to someone who has actual money at some point about this, and I think a lot of people just didn't believe that China could handle this actually not just as well as the US, but better. I think that, they were like, okay, yes, now you're seeing that China is really still a third world country, and wow, this is some fucked up shit. Wow, they're welding people's doors shut, but, right. Not going to happen here, right? And so at the end of February, I took a trip down to this event that was sponsored by Justin Murphy. I don't know if you know Justin.
I know of him.
Did like a public event with him. We made a reasonably professional tape of that. It's a good show. And so I was doing this public event down there, and it's February 28th, and I'm like, this is the last week that I would go, down. This is the last week that I would do this, right? And because I know what's happening, right? And I'm driving down there with this friend, and we're driving down, and we stop in an In-N-Out Burger, and I'm like, this place will be empty in 2 weeks.
Yeah,
in 3 weeks, right? And but at the time it seemed completely impossible. And I went to buy in January. I pulled my kids out of Chinese New Year. As you remember, at the time they were in Chinese school. as you remember at the time, that's racist to like be afraid of Chinese people because of the virus, right? You remember how racist that was, and masks at the time were also racist.
Yes.
And I believe Vox recently just shamefully memory hold like a an anti-mask tweet from like January or February, right? So at the same time, I'm basically like, okay, I know this is happening, so I'm going to actually write about it. So I wrote a couple of pieces. The first appeared at the American Mind, and that was I was writing it during most of the middle of January, and it appears at the start of February. And I'm basically just like shut off all the flights over the oceans. Like, right. It would have been actually I was too slow writing it, and it would have been like 2 weeks too late. But as I put this out, Trump announces this order, which is essentially. We're going to shut down flights from China. Of course, the order has like holes, like, it's like you can fly through Taiwan. It doesn't apply to American citizens. Like, it's totally irrational. But I'm like, well, at least somebody's trying to do something here. But you could so easily have like just inconvenienced a few travelers for a few weeks and just separated the hemispheres. And like, why you have air travel between the hemispheres when even a plausible pandemic is developing in one of them? It's just evidence of just complete brainlessness, right? Like if you had a king and your king was like 7 years old, your 7-year-old king would come up with that solution, right? And well, instantly knowing, okay, maybe the 7-year-olds I know have known well have not been average 7-year-olds, but if you want an average, I don't know, but instantly, right? It's just like, why are you not inconveniencing a few tourists? And as it turned out, we wound up inconveniencing quite a few tourists anyway. And that's sort of the course of the thing. Then the next piece that I wrote, which was and the worst thing about going down to LA in February is that it was this basically group house party that like Justin Murphy had set up. Well, of course, now we know, and I of course knew very well at the time, that this is basically like the COVID equivalent of an orgy, right? It was not an orgy, but as far as airborne particles go, it was certainly an orgy, right? And
just less fun.
Less. Well, arguably, I don't know. It depends on your taste, I guess. But no, it was fun. It was full of people, getting blitzed and expressing ideas at each other is like as 20-somethings have been wont to do since the beginning of the world, right? And it's a little different when you're my age, but not that different. And and it was a fun event, and and I met some very cool people, and some very good things happened out of me going to that. But one of them, it was like it's like I met some people whose film had gotten into South by Southwest, and they were of course very excited about this, and I'm like, it's not going to happen.
Ouch.
And so like basically like this was a rare, it's like I act like a prophet, all the time, but I don't feel like a prophet. I feel like an imposter. But at this particular moment, I felt like a prophet, right? So that was kind of the early COVID, and then I think the second piece that I wrote came out later in March, just as people, including the stock market, were basically realizing that there was shit going on here. Now, the stock market, of course, turns around. I was lucky enough to basically sell my big bet, which was originally a small bet at the bottom, but I, was totally over pessimistic on the V-shaped recovery. I didn't really, I wasn't cynical enough to basically realize how much this financial system could decouple the stock market from the real economy. And I should have realized that, because honestly, all of my theories tell me that, but I just didn't sort of believe myself adequately. So that's a lesson to all of you out of there. You should believe me more, and you'll make more money. But but only when I say the right thing. So in any case, so my COVID betting record, such as it is, is not completely perfect, but it did considerably assist in moving me out of the Bay Area to this undisclosed location. And but in any case, so I wrote the second piece, and the second piece was, no offense, perhaps a little too spicy for Claremont's American Mind, because so I moved that to Medium, and then later I moved to Substack. which I sort of planned to do that all along, honestly.
Right.
Like, I love the guys at the American Mind, don't get me wrong, but like they have very real institutional constraints.
Right.
And one of their very real institutional constraints is that basically, it's pretty hard for them to basically publish, or it was hard then. Now it seems a little maybe more obvious. It was a little hard for them to publish, in March, a piece that was basically calling for martial law and an emergency coronavirus dictatorship to basically solve this problem. Now, including, I was like, you need human challenge trials. You need to basically just do everything really fast. And the thing is, if you look at Operation Warp Speed, in a way, it was kind of the normie version of that almost. It was like pretty fast. And you realize when you look at this, wow, they speeded this up by 10x, and there's another 10x in there. You can smell that there's another 10x in there. They're like, oh, wow, yeah, we're still going to take another year to produce an amount of chemical that can fit in a motherfucking suitcase. Like if you'd said that to like General Groves, working on Los Alamos, he'd have gone ballistic. There wouldn't even been a particle of you left in that fucking room, right? And like, oh yeah, sorry, we put our order in for the reagent too late, like what the fuck, right? There's literally nothing in the whole productive capacity of the country more important than this. And you're taking a year, and you're taking a year just to test it, and somehow in that year you didn't manage to spin up the fucking manufacturing capacity.
Now, how do you explain that?
I explain that by the fact that these are very complicated systems. Okay. And I was just trying to explain that, I get lots of practice because my kids are old enough to ask questions, but not really old enough to understand the depth of some of the responses, as I think most people are not old enough to understand the depth of like reality, basically. So I have to simplify these things. And, what I said, just now to my daughter is, I'm like, you have to realize that systems can be a lot stupider than people.
Leave me alone!
And especially the people in them. And so when you look at the processes by which, for example, let's talk about vaccine production and distribution. One of the reasons why this shit takes so long is that, if you've ever known anyone who works in the pharmaceutical industry or approximate industry, it is insanely bureaucratic. It makes DOD basically look like, a hawala, right? It's like everything generates these enormous reams of paper, and that's part of what fucked, FDA and CDC up, their initial, fuck up of the response, which had nothing to do with Donald J. Trump. Remember the test, it was fucked up, and no, they wouldn't even let people test for the virus. And, all of that comes from basically these processes where everyone is praised for applying the brakes liberally at all times. And so, and the worst possible case outcome, of course, the discounting of type A errors and type B errors, all this stuff as a libertarian is, of course, wildly out of whack. And so, if you look at basically what the 1940s would have done to make this vaccine, which, if you go back and read pre-COVID about the mRNA processes, one of the advantages of the mRNA process is like, this is really cheap and easy to do. Right? And this is not like this like hugely recondite thing. What's hugely recondite about it is basically doing it with the 6 nines of precision and 6 nines of every change in every process is documented in every possible way. What they would have done in the 40s is just made a couple of basically outdoor kiddie swimming pools full of the stuff, driven it around in a fucking refrigerator car, and basically you line up next to the refrigerator car in your cute 1940s clothing, which makes you look like a civilized person, and you get your fucking shot. And it's like one of the things, so for example, most of these vaccines are double dose, so most of the protection is provided by the first dose. So it could be like, oh, we're just going to give everyone 1 dose and then go around, we're going to circle back and get your booster and basically double the protection. They can't do that, of course, because that would involve changing the thing that they tested.
You I don't trust, and I certainly have no shortage of patience.
Change the thing that you tested? You can't do that. And what, right? And so it's basically like this, huge morass of procedure, which has somehow been coaxed to run maybe not 10 times, but, a few times faster than it usually does. But that just shows you how absurd the whole sort of procedural thing is
Right.
for an emergency like this.
Right.
And so, basically, if you had a coronavirus authority back in April, they would have been running, okay, you probably do want to test this in humans. You need basically, how long does it take to test it in humans? You need the humans, okay. Go down to your local prison, get people to volunteer. Done. Right, done. Completely unethical, violates, that's like what Hitler would do, right? Yeah. Hitler would actually ask people to, give people a year off their sentence for volunteering for a trial. Oh, and that would be a total Hitler move, right? And he would save 300,000, undeserving white lives by doing that, right? And so like, number one, you do that. You probably run it through monkeys first. You run it through monkeys. You run around in people. You need like, if you're actually infecting people rather than just letting them sort of walk around waiting to get randomly infected, along with a bunch of people who you gave fake shots so they would also get randomly infected. Right. No, just run the goddamn experiment and stop being a little bitch. Yeah. Right. And so, in this timeline, you're basically running the experiment while not being a little bitch. You're running that with like 5 or 6 things at the same time. Right. So you need to, purposely infect. I haven't done the math, but maybe as many as 1,000 or 2,000 people. Yep. Half of whom need to be protected and half of whom not. That takes about a month. During that time, you're spinning up your ability to mix mRNA with some lipids and put it in a giant indoor kiddie pool and ship it around in a cold ass freezer truck, right? And by the end of April, people are sticking this shit in their arms, and the whole shit show of like all of this never fucking happens. And by the way, at the same time, you're either doing a real lockdown or not doing a real lockdown. I think one of the most telling things, I actually had a conversation, I only have genial nice conversations, but I had a conversation with this guy on Clubhouse, actually, this guy Thomas Puello. You might remember him from The Hammer and the Dance. The Hammer and the Dance. Do you remember The Hammer and the Dance? This was the like long medium post about the right way to deal with COVID. No. And the idea is that you'd hammer it down with a hammer, right? And then you kind of dance around, and it's like you're seeing the dance now, right? And it's a dance of pain. It is not a beautiful thing, right? Yes. And part of the thing that basically gave me such a difference of opinion, you must remember test and trace. Remember test and trace? I think in some countries they kind of actually have test and trace, sure, but not fucking here, right? And
South Korea, right? South Korea,
right? Yeah, right. What South Korea has it's basically, I don't know how to put this. It's a civilized country. They have a government and they make things. Mm-hmm. And other than that, basically the same. Uh-huh. It's like I don't know how to put this, but command and control. Hey, Americans, might want to hold on to your chair there.
I have something very embarrassing to announce. I've been testing hand lotions for the last few weeks. That's because of this damn virus and the advice we've been given for most of this year that we must wash our hands. Now, the Washington Post just announced, I think last week, that pack, otherwise known as the Thad pack, or Be Like Yourself, make yourself feel better, make your body feel better for 2021, and I thank you. But command and control economies and monarchical rule, right? I mean, because you're talking about World War II here, which was a command and control economy, right? And you're saying it
was a command and control economy, but here's the interesting thing about that is that, and so, the comparison there is you're comparing, the World War II command and control economy really with a Korean kind of chaebol, and I assume the central government is the chaebol are the big, like the Zaibatsu, the big Korean conglomerates, basically there that are the size of governments, right? Like Hyundai, right? You've heard of Hyundai, yes, right? Basically, yes, yeah, right. And
I've driven a
Mitsubishi, right? So you have these monstrous organizations, and you have a government that, by all accounts, is run very much like one of these monster effective organizations. Yeah. Are they Apple? Are they Tesla? No. Are they SpaceX? No, not quite, but they're still pretty effective, yeah, right? And that's Korea, and you get back here and you basically are confronted with something very, very different. You have a different kind of government. It has a different relationship with its people. And you had all these pundits at the time that were writing about the United States as if it had a real government and it could actually do these things. So it's like, oh, we're gonna like quarantine the state, or we're gonna separate this state from that state. We're gonna have red zones and green zones. Remember the red zones and green zones, right? You know, and you're just like, imagined all of these things that sort of, yes, if there was sort of a government with a kind of, you know, cohesive energy in the United States, it could in theory do these things. It would probably be doing other things, but yes, it could do these things. But like the idea of expecting like New York City's public health service to like trace COVID traces, it's like, it would like, I was about to say it would be like expecting my 10-year-old son to drive a car. It would be like expecting my 10-year-old son to fly a helicopter. Right, you know, and I'm just like, no way, right, you know, and it really, and it exposed to me the extent to which, like, I think when you look at most of these pundits, they have very little idea of like what government actually is and what actually goes on it. They also have very little idea of the process that brings them all the stuff they order on Amazon and all like the software they use and all of that. They have very little idea of how that comes to them. And so both of these things are kind of abstractions in a way in their heads. And so, you know, they don't realize that the separation in effectiveness between them is orders of magnitude. And occasionally you'll see that in, for example, remember the Obamacare website, where basically using standard DC IT procedures, they spent billions of dollars on making a website and couldn't get it done.
Right.
And then they brought in a bunch of, you know, transsexual liberals from Silicon Valley, and the transsexual liberals fixed it in 15 minutes for like $5, right? You know, and the like, this is a real kind of circulation of the elites moment, you know, in certain interesting ways. You know, not even the transsexual liberals, until they got to DC, realized how much better than these people they were. Right. And then they got to DC and they were like, oh my God, we've got to form the US Digital Service and, like, you know, upgrade IT in DC to Silicon Valley standards. And of course, what happens is they create these new institutions and they wind up getting downgraded to DC standards. Right. Because eventually they run out of exceptions and have to operate like by DC rules. The people are a little bit better, but you know, it's mainly the rules that things operate under. So to get back to your original question about why is this different in World War II, I think there's a very important, you know, lesson there, which is that it's not necessarily the sort of formal nature of an organization, whether it's officially part of the government or not part of the government. There's a lot, I mean, is the gas company part of the government? It certainly seems to operate like it. In fact, it's the main, you know, source of identity documents in this country today. It's just one of the many fucked up things about it. You know, you've ever had the DMV ask you for a utility bill and you're like, but that's a private company.
That's right. That's right.
The category error, right? You know, there's always an autistic part of you that wants to be like, category error. And so the thing you got to understand about the New Deal environment is that what made the New Deal work, or what made, for example, the Manhattan Project work, is simply that this was a new organization. As a new organization, it could operate. It was basically a startup. It was no different from a startup in no particular respects. A startup is also mildly accountable to its backers, and the New Deal was mildly accountable to its backers. And otherwise, it could do whatever the heck it wanted. And you know, if Harry Hopkins wanted the government to do anything, he would just make a call, and it would happen. Right. And people still think that Donald John Trump has or had that power, which is just incredible to me. And like, it just, you know, it's night and day, right? And so when you look at, for example, how the Manhattan Project or even the Apollo Project ran or operated, you know, it's sort of more interesting to see when you look at the way it actually functions and the kinds of people that it employs and how it works and how it makes decisions. You know, it looks a lot more like Tesla than like the Department of Energy. The thing is, the Department of Energy, for which my mother actually worked at one point, the Department of Energy is actually the lineal bureaucratic descendant of the Manhattan Project. That's why it handles all the nuke stuff. It's actually literally the same organization.
Okay,
so you basically, so you've taken it's like a company that used to be a startup and is now just unbelievably, it's like a salmon in spawning season, but it's immortal and refuses to die. It's this horrible, like, zombie fish. You know how salmon, you can't even eat like spawning salmon because they've devoured themselves from the inside. That's basically, like that's I feel an appropriate metaphor for looking at these organizations. They're just completely marbled with like fat and stupid shit. It's like the first researchers who were trying to get FDA to approve their, like, let them test for COVID. Like, the FDA was just like, they sent a request in and heard nothing, and then they hear nothing, and they hear nothing, and they ask again. They're like, oh yeah, you didn't send it in properly. You also need to send in a physical stack of paper with your application. Okay. Right, and just like unbelievable, like stuff out of the Soviet Union, right? And these are, like, I mean, especially the fact that you see complaints like this basically is telling, because actually nobody anywhere near anything regulated by FDA wants to cross those motherfuckers, right? And like, once they decide they don't like you, you are fucked. And this is well known to everyone in the industry.
Right.
I can say this because I've heard it from people in the industry, but no one in the industry could say this. Actually, a VC, Joe Lonsdale, wrote a piece about this a little while ago on Medium. I don't know Lonsdale, but he wrote this piece where he was basically like, yeah, I actually sent an anti-FDA op-ed to a bunch of newspapers, and the editors of the newspapers were like, we can't publish this because we need to protect our relationship with FDA. Right. So, essentially, like, you think that you're looking at this free and independent thing, and you don't realize how much even, FDA has even taken control of the sources which write, of the outlets which write about FDA-related things. Because guess what? If you're a journalist and you talk shit about FDA, or you don't trust your sources, why the fuck are they ever going to talk to you again? Do you know how many people want to talk to them? Do you know how many people would like to write the definitive FDA tongue bath for the New Yorker?
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. You couldn't fit them in the fucking Superdome, right? And you literally could not fit them in the Superdome,
of course.
And so the idea that basically you're going to get anything, but a tongue bath out of, the Benjamin Wallace Wells of the world is ridiculous. And you're sitting there reading this piece, reading this beautifully written, prose in the New Yorker, which is, don't get me wrong, the New Yorker will pick one of the best writers in that Superdome, right? And this is where your vision of reality is coming from. And it looks really good. It smells really good. It's really great, but it's like suborned in this disgusting way that you can't even imagine. And then the reality is basically this agency is so fucking incompetent that they're like, oh, you didn't send in your stack of paper. Or, oh yeah, you can't change the vaccine schedule to like double the effectiveness of it,
right,
even though that might save 20,000 lives,
right?
And so the like it's this ludicrous state of affairs, and people dimly out there beyond the sort of pale of the ruling class sense that it's ludicrous, except that the only solution that they can sort of come up with is Donald J. Trump and QAnon. Right.
Right.
And it's just like the spirit there is right. The spirit is deeply right. But, I think we can come out and say that the execution is also deeply flawed.
Okay. So let me stop you there. So all
right. I think that was a complete rant. I think it was a full rant.
No, it's fabulous. I just want to make sure that people who are unfamiliar with you and your work and your ideas are following us here. So correct me if I'm wrong. You are favorable toward the kind of command and control economy during World War II in the United States, toward an issue like this. Similarly with China, it sounds like you're favorable to China's very draconian lockdown, right, which was all from the top. right?
Well, if you're going to do...
Wait, hold on. And South Korea is like the corporate cartels essentially controlling this stuff, vertically, directly. A monarchical response, right, is what you are favoring.
A monarchical... The thing is that basically we with this lockdown, with these fake, bogus lockdowns, right, you really get the worst of both worlds, because you basically fuck things, you fuck up everyone's life.
Yes.
And yet, you're not actually solving the problem.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that, like there was this thing that, remember, 15 days to flatten the curve, right?
Yep.
And the thing is, if you know anything about math, that one of the most difficult things to do with an exponential curve is to flatten it. You can drive it to zero, or you can drive it to infinity, but managing it as flat so that R naught is 1 is really is a totally ridiculous thing to do from a strategic perspective. Huh. And then, but it sort of becomes accepted as the gospel. And so this is, and I really do blame the hammer and the dance guy for this, because, if you're going to you're going to either hammer it or not hammer it, right? Either you're going to adopt a mitigation strategy, which is more Sweden-like, or you're going to actually hammer it in a way that actually works.
Okay.
And the thing is that one of the things that the Asian experience shows us, whether it's the Chinese sort of very blunt force version, Taiwan and Japan, managed to do it very gently, but still firmly enough. New Zealand gets lucky and can crack down late enough before it's sort of widespread. Australia, even kind of similar. Even on Australia and New Zealand have sort of more of a kind of centralized, in this case, Victorian tradition of public administration than the U.S. does. And, it's kind of, they have that NHS mindset, basically, that gives the state more power, right? And the thing is that and those states have, along with the power, they have a reasonable level of competence. And, whereas here we tend to think of disempowering the state as making it incompetent, and those sort of things are not quite equivalent in my mindset, right? So if you look at essentially what sort of could have been done in the U.S. by an authority that was really dedicated to solving the problem in a month, or 2 months,
we could have done it.
That solution would involve both very heavy population management and very fast vaccine development, and either one or both of those things probably would have worked. Now, it's true that when I was posting in March, even, basically, I still overrated the seriousness of the disease because I didn't recognize what a steep age curve in effect it has.
Right.
On the other hand, this is a disease where there are a lot of credible reports of it doing, basically, it's not killing younger people very much, but the chances that it's doing relatively subtle organ damage that might still be taking a few years off of your life just off the other end.
Yeah.
Is by no means insignificant, right? Yep. So, you're basically, because when your young body sort of loses regenerative capacity, by definition, you're not going to notice. And so that's to me, that's the main reason why, not worrying that I'll die, that's the main reason why I, as a 40-something guy, don't want to get it. Right. But definitely, it's not the Soderbergh bug either. Right, that's still a fabulous film, but Soderbergh's Contagion.
Oh, no, I haven't. Oh, what was that?
You must have seen it.
Was that Dustin Hoffman?
No. Was Dustin Hoffman in that?
What am I thinking of?
You're thinking of the this is the one with Jude Law. Is Jude Law in it?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I think Dustin Hoffman, I think, is the other one. But the Outbreak or something.
Outbreak. Yeah.
Outbreak. You're thinking about Contagion is a much better. Contagion is actually it's actually literally like supposedly a bat virus in Contagion, but this bat virus was not as bad. But the thing is that you see in terms of the response, it's like you see the incompetent lockdown. You see the switch around from masks are bad to masks are good. Accompanied by that switch around is no attempt to provide actual filtering masks to people. Instead, you just have all these fools walking around with freaking hippie bandanas over their faces, and you can see how effective that is. It's probably better than nothing. But you can buy a KN95 for like $3 now. Just get one. It's at least as comfortable and it actually works. And mostly, when I was buying what I wear is a P100 respirator, and which makes me look like a total freak. And this stuff gets into your eyes also, so I'll wear ski goggles, which makes me look like a complete alien freak, right? Again, I don't know if I'd go this far if my wife wasn't high risk, but even when I sort of betting on this thing, knowing what was going on in February, bought my P100, I felt like a total survivalist prepper nutcase. Which is, I think, the way you should feel if you're a survivalist prepper nutcase, but that doesn't necessarily mean you shouldn't be a survivalist prepper nutcase. I think the survivalist prepper nutcases have frankly had a pretty good year of this one. It's not the big one, but it's certainly been something. So essentially, it's like the Swedish, or a Swedish-like approach, or a modified Swedish-like approach, doing probably way better with nursing homes, is probably what you'd recommend for sort of existing paths of authority in this country. I think it actually would have been very, very easy for the Trump administration to basically be like, we're going to run this in a completely centralized fashion, and we're just going to tell everyone what to do for 2 weeks. But of course, he had no interest in, nobody wants that responsibility, right? And the, again, Operation Warp Speed is this kind of, slightly gilded version of that. But which only applies to the vaccine and drug part, and not to the basically, okay, now we're actually going to seriously try to stop contagion part, which the Chinese did. It worked for them.
I know. Right. I was going to say, so the Chinese had this top-down draconian lockdown, and they ended it in 2 months, right? It was basically done in 2 months. Now, our wonderful new sponsor, Mantafly, needs your help. They're building something that will change the world for a lot of ordinary working class entrepreneurs who suffer from state regulations and licensing rules. They're building a platform that will connect mobile beauty professionals with clients. This includes barbers, massage therapists, nail technicians, hair braiders, and the like. I want to ask you right now to sign up at mantafly.com. It doesn't cost you anything, but also to tell your significant other about it, because they are starting beta testing soon, and they need volunteers to test out the app. Anyone, as I said, can join for free. Vendors self-report their licensing status, and they accept people who are still in training. They want to help people as soon as possible, and the more people beta testing in early 2021, the faster they can fine-tune the app for public release and help people get back to work. So go to mantafly.com, sign up for their beta testing, and change the world. Thank you so much.
We're done in a month, and then they took another month to be sure.
Yes,
because they're not stupid over there.
What you are prescribing in this country is the left-wing idea about what should have been done with the virus, right?
What's interesting is, I'm old enough to remember that wasn't the left, when that wasn't the left-wing idea. I'm old enough to remember when it was racist to be worried about the coronavirus, right?
For a minute.
For at least 2 weeks. And the interesting thing is that I think that actually tells you a lot about our system of ideas, because essentially what the left did with that is, I think it's unclear whether the left seized what I would characterize as the high ground, or whether it was actually more that the right seized the low ground, or it was actually more that Donald Trump seized the low ground.
Yeah.
I definitely basically found that he has everything that Donald J. Trump does, he does on instinct. He doesn't think, he acts on instinct. He trusts that instinct. It's done reasonably well for him. A lot of the times it works very well. Many times it works very poorly, and it has almost no determination or follow through. And that's really what made his administration a shit show of failure. And so there's another world in which basically, in every case in American politics, if Trump had basically been like, okay, coronavirus is death, and I'm here to shut it down, and I'm going to take power to shut it down. There is no world in which the viewpoint of the American left would not have been, it's just the flu, shut up racist, why are you being so racist about viruses? We're going to have, cuddle orgies all day long at Comet Ping Pong Pizza, right? And like that would have been their response. And they would have basically been like, you wild horses cannot drag these people to admit that they're wrong. And so you would have basically pinpointed them. You would have, if you had taken that ground, or even, taking the sort of ground of Sweden would have been a little different. I'm not sure that even Sweden is really completely comfortable with what it's done here. That would have been a different move. Okay. But it also would have been a move rather than a spasmodic reflexive reaction. Gotcha. And which is kind of all this White House was capable of. And but if you'd basically taken the move of being draconian about the coronavirus and taken that as a right-wing position, we would be talking today and we would feel that that was completely natural and inevitable. Huh. And so, our understanding of these positions tends to be, it's like when you're a Mohammedan, right? When you're a Muslim, and I'm like, why do you believe in Muhammad? The answer will be because Muhammad is great and Muhammad is the prophet or whatever. It won't be because my parents taught me to believe in Muhammad. Right? But causally, there is absolutely no doubt that even if his parents were teaching him the truth, Muhammad is the prophet, right? Mm-hmm. That causally the reason he's a Muslim is that his parents taught him to be a Muslim. And if his parents had taught him to be a furry, he would be a furry, right? And yep. And so when you look at these positions and you say, well, that's a left-wing position, you tend to imply that categorization is not a contingent one. And you tend to imply that you can derive the thing from, the ideology from the position. I might have used this analogy last time we talked, but there's a case which is absolutely precious to me, which I never cease to bring up, which is in 1922, I believe, in South Africa, there was an event called the Rand Revolt, which was a mine workers strike. And the mine workers were white mine workers, and this strike was sponsored by the Communist Party of South Africa, yep. Which later evolved, of course, and Mandela was on its Politburo, as we learned. Yep. Well, after his death. At the time, of course, this was a purely white and working class organization, because that's what communism was about at that time, the working class, yep. As you may recall. And they carried these. There was one, and this was not all their picket signs said, but I would have to actually dig up this piece of historical research, but I'm sure that I've seen it, which is someone in the 1920s in South Africa carrying a picket sign which reads, "Workers of the world unite to keep South Africa white." Right. So of course, right, they're just like, the working man's labor should not be undercut by these black savages, right? And so the thing is that they fall into this, like, it's sort of any port in a storm. It's like Dr. Seuss's, racist World War II cartoons, right? Most people know that Dr. Seuss wrote some of the most amazingly, viciously, totally Der Stürmer tier cartoons showing like Japanese with buck teeth looking like monkeys. Correct. Right? Yes. And like monkeys with buck teeth, right? That was the American vision of Dr. Seuss of the Jap, right? A super soldier, who was also a buck-toothed monkey, mm-hmm. and did Dr. Seuss and was just absolutely ruthless killer, right? And would die for the emperor. And did Dr. Seuss, like contribute to spreading the stereotype? He did it enthusiastically. Oh, yeah. It was part of, basically, it was part of, Tikkun Olam, healing the world, as they say in Reform Judaism. That's right. So I have no doubt that the cartoons of the buck-toothed Jap monkeys felt like Tikkun Olam. Sure. For Theodore Geisel, right? Yes. And so, that's how, like, they can justify anything for themselves, right? And sort of, it's a very addict-like kind of behavior. And so to basically say, that, yes, it became the left-wing policy, and like when you sort of unpack it, it has, it has the characteristics, like, the only interesting thing for basically the American right, as far as I'm aware, is studying and understanding its enemy, the American left. And any failure to understand this mortal foe is just a failure of weakness and unacceptable. Like, you have to know your enemy. And don't own the lib, know the lib, right? And so when you look at this COVID response stuff, it's like you see the virtues and the flaws of the lib at the same time. And in order to really delineate the flaws, I mean, and these flaws are just amazing, like the let grandma die because she's white thing that we just had last week, where people somehow you got this education in college that really taught you that you could get away with this shit, right?
Right.
And the fact is most Americans are just not as well educated as you, and they're not going to be as well educated as you, and you're not going to get away with this shit. And you see that combined with, the ability to say, okay, yes, this is a respiratory disease. Yes, you can, reduce its spread by wearing, masks with filters in it. And then we're just going to focus on compelling everyone to wear masks and just totally drop the ball on making them wear good masks. Right. So you see these things where sort of the larger superstructure of it makes sense. And then it degenerates into these things that, at least from my perspective, make no sense at all.
Okay.
And that's what, you have to understand sort of the pattern of error and accuracy. But the thing is, if you basically seized any kind of high ground as the right in April, these people would be fucked, basically. I mean, you really sort of blew the chance to basically say, no, actually, we know how to run things in a sane and sensible way, and we're just going to do it, and we're going to blow the minds of everyone in the world by how well we do this. Okay. And how well we execute on this problem. And that just wasn't done.
Yeah, it was interesting what you said about the left-wing response and going back to, sort of how they've changed and their politics tend to be contingent. So I have heard you, or I've seen you write that progressives are interested in power as an end in itself, right?
Yes.
Is that your analysis of the left-wing mind?
I think that's not the way I would explain that in a more, in a way. I mean, that's a very compact statement. Mm-hmm. That's certainly not the way leftists think they think.
Of course.
And so, of course. And so the thing is that what actually happens with the left is, think about, you're a heroin addict. Okay. You're a heroin addict, and they're basically, you need to go out and buy a gallon of milk. Now, there's two bodegas that you could go to and buy the gallon of milk at. One of them is right next to the alley where your dealer hangs out. The other is nowhere, right? And so you're basically the milk is always fresher here, it's just better milk, and you basically, you're going to come up with sort of all of these rationalizations, that are basically workers of the world unite to keep South Africa white. They don't really have anything to do with, what you subsequently learn from these people is not only do they not care about keeping South Africa white, they don't even care about the workers of the world.
That's right.
And so, even, the way in which they drop the workers of the world and go straight to basically from class politics to race politics, mm-hmm. without even taking a breath.
That's right.
And just abandoning their former clients, just leaving them to
exactly
just
right.
rot by the side of the road when they find a hotter girlfriend.
Yes.
Or basically, to go back to our analogy, suddenly you meet another dealer whose shots are hotter, right? They're not as cut, right? And suddenly you're like, yeah, man, the milk from this bodega, man, it's always sour. They keep it back there. They don't even control the fridge, and so, the mentality, they don't want to sort of admit that that's what draws them to these positions. And when you suggest other positions or other ways, it's like you can go and talk to, there was a piece by Robert Putnam, Harvard sociologist, very, very good guy. Mm-hmm. Really a titan. There won't be his like again, in the New York Times, I think, the other day. And Putnam comes up with, all of these great theories why, if you look at, any kind of sociological statistics, the development of African Americans, which has been going upward and to the right, around the time of the civil rights movement, starts going downward and to the right. And you're just like, why? Here I'm looking at these numbers, and then here's this beautiful story that I've known by heart since I was a kindergartner, and these numbers are giving me the opposite of the story, right? The numbers are actually telling me that instead of having been exalted and promoted to the high, most important cause in American political life, the African American has been fucked, broken, and driven across the land. That's what the numbers are telling me. Strangely enough, that is what my own fucking eyesight is telling me, right? And so, as I will never cease to point out, every major American city used to have a black business district.
Correct.
Right? And San Francisco, right? Fucking San Francisco, which had no black people until the 40s, right? And like, so you're saying, okay, here's this beautiful story, but this beautiful story contradicts everything I know of reality, both from the statistics and from my eyesight. Now, of course, Putnam is of course not going to draw the same lessons from this that I am. He's going to draw the the lessons of the usual lesson is we have to try harder. There's a story of the traveling horse doctor who comes by. He comes by some farm, and the farmer comes up to him. He's like, my horse is very sick, and the horse doctor is like, no problem. I've heard these symptoms before. It's easy to resolve. Just give your horse a cup of turpentine. So the farmer goes home and gives his horse a cup of turpentine. He comes back to the doctor, and he's like, I gave my horse a cup of turpentine, and he was dead in 15 minutes.
I don't know.
And I'm like, the doctor's like, I'm really sorry. I'm kicking myself over this. I told you the wrong thing. Your horse was clearly sicker than I thought. I should have prescribed 2 cups of turpentine. So that's of course, like logic, cannot prevent you from drawing that conclusion. Only common sense can do so, right? But common sense is exactly what has been replaced by desire in the mind of the junkie.
Gotcha.
And common sense would tell him that he's not on the right path in life, but instead he has this little monkey in his brain that tells him, no, that's the bodega that really always has the good milk, right? And that's that's the phenomenon you're looking at in these people's heads. And that's why I always think of, when I'm trying to sort of talk to them, I never want to frame it as an argument. I always want to be like, the purpose of this conversation is for me to understand how you think. First of all, because I want to know how you think, because it's fascinating to me. It's basically a glimpse into the mind of a human who's become a monster, right? And I need to understand that, because know your enemy. And then also, as they express themselves, they'll basically come out with kind of certain contradictions where you can kind of probe a little more and kind of get them to articulate and understand and explain those contradictions. And really your goal is to get them to a point where they experience the cognitive dissonance very directly, and they become a little bit flustered. And you can't fluster them, for yourself, and you have to be very, very cool and calm and collected. And you're basically you actually want to hear what they have to say, and you just assume that they don't want to hear what you have to say, which in fact they don't. They really don't.
And this almost fits with your theory of, or your prescription of compliance with power. Just let them talk. Let them talk.
Let them talk.
Don't challenge them.
Right.
Don't challenge them.
Don't challenge them, because the thing is that when you challenge them, you're basically saying something that's not true, which is that you're on a level with them. And you're actually not on the level with them, because they're on the top and you're on the bottom.
Correct.
If you were on the top and they were on the bottom, it would be a different conversation.
Yes.
But and that's the other thing to remember about these people, is that when you're looking at someone who is basically a power addict by nature, you're looking at someone who would be a Nazi in Nazi Germany and a Stalinist, and in Nero's Rome, he would love Nero, right? And so the thing is that to argue with this person is almost like, you know, the only really effective way to argue with this person is the argumentum, you know, ad baculum, as it's called.
What does that mean?
It means with the club. So this was the way we out argued Hitler, right? We we bombed his cities, occupied his country, and one of the things that we discovered actually after, you know, we just ruthlessly leveled these motherfuckers, is we were like, these are the most fanaticized people in history. They make the Irish look like Buddhists, right? They're going to be setting off roadside bombs till the cows come home.
Yes.
And we thought this in Germany, and we thought this in Japan, and we'd seen what they did in the 20s. We were totally prepared for that eventuality, right? And, you know, the werewolves, right? And basically nothing fucking happened. Now, you might say that nothing fucking happened because nothing was going to happen. They didn't leave that to chance. It was a very firm and manly occupation. It really took a lot of cues from British imperialism, basically. It was not, they were not fucking around. Well, and part of the result of that, you know,
I mean, it was even Churchill's idea in part, right?
Yeah. And, you know, it's like, you know, incredible things like starving the civilians after the war, right? You know, that was not only done after World War I, that was done after World War II. Yes. And the, you know, what can I say? It worked. Right? I mean, you know, are they not eating out of our hands to this day?
That's right. There is no one who is more pro-American than a German politician.
I know. I mean, basically, this was the pit bull of Europe, and you could starve it for 3 weeks and leave it in a kennel alone with a couple of kittens, and it would make friends with them. You know,
I've listened to interviews with government officials in Germany, and it's like I'm shocked at how like jingoistic they are as speaking on behalf of America. They just love the United States, and they're
more Americans than the American. And, you know, and it's like this amazing victory of, and this is one thing, you know, maybe I advised you and your readers to watch this little film Hitler Lives last.
Yes, I looked at it. I watched it after we interviewed.
Yeah, it's mind blowing, right?
It's mind and it's they racialized the German.
They racialized. They're basically like, okay, this is why, you know, you fought this war against Germany. It was actually a race war.
Yes.
Against the eternal German.
That's right.
Fought to prevent the German conquest of the earth.
The eternal German, which means we have
the eternal German, right?
Occupy them, and we have to remake their brains biologically.
We have to remake their brains, right? And this was, I mean, you know, it's funny, you know, I've gotten involved with some film people. I was showing this to like a total film guy, and the amazing thing about showing Hitler Lives, which by the way was directed by Don Siegel, who later directed Harry, and the script is by Dr. Seuss.
Dr. Seuss again
in the credits.
There he is.
Dr. Seuss again, right? There it is, Dr. Seuss, right? You know, it's Dr. Seuss's world. We just live in it, right? And it's this just incredibly just like jingoistic. It just like traffics in all of these things that you're just like not supposed to do. It like corrodes your soul, and it doesn't mention the Holocaust at all. It shows pictures of the Holocaust, but it never mentions the word Jew. Like, these are definitely pictures of the Holocaust, which definitely actually happened. The story of the film is that Hitler's an equal opportunity baby killer. He wants to conquer the world to kill babies. And you know, like Jews, what Jews? Like, you know, like and of course it makes sense in the propaganda context of the war. And yet it's just like, you know, the amazing thing about the Holocaust is that essentially the best reason to fight World War II was discovered after World War II. That's right. They knew this was going on, and you know, to the extent that they knew, they refused to believe it.
Absolutely,
they literally refused to believe it because it made shitty propaganda. That's right. And so, far from being a piece of Allied propaganda that survived after the war, it's a piece of far from being a piece of false Allied propaganda that survived after the war. It's a piece of true Allied propaganda that was invented after the war and retconned into being the reason for the war.
That's right.
Now, no historian will tell you that World War II was fought, you know, to avert the Holocaust, just as no historian will tell you that the Civil War was fought to defeat slavery.
Correct.
Or at least, you know, that certainly wasn't what anyone was saying at the time.
Correct. Yes.
But you know, nonetheless, you know, like as perhaps maybe I've used this one on you before. Stop me if you need to. But it's like if in 1861 you said that the Civil War was a war to abolish slavery and, you know, free the black man and bring him up to a level with the white man. And you said that in a bar in Chicago, or probably even most bars in Boston, you get the shit beaten out of you. Whereas if you said it in Richmond, you'd be like, yeah, you know, buy that man another drink, right? You know, and so we've taken actually the Confederate theory of the start of the war.
Wow.
Has become our theory, right?
Right.
And that's quite a reversal, you know. And it's like, the thing is that were there people in the North who had that position? Yes, they were called abolitionists, and they were roughly in the same demographic and class position as basically communists today. They were the ruling class.
They were the original progressives.
They were the dominant cultural class, not really yet the governing class.
I mean, they were the original progressives.
They were the original progressives, right? Absolutely. You know, and so they were the radical Republicans when they weren't being called black Republicans, they were being called red Republicans, right? And by red, you know, they mean red, right? You know, that's the 20th century meaning of the word red. That's a 19th century term, right? And so, you know, Abraham Lincoln, when he was elected president, was the leader of the most left-wing political party on earth.
Definitely.
Most Republicans don't really do this, right? You know, and most Lincoln scholars don't even really want to do this. Definitely. And certainly most Republican Lincoln scholars do not want to do it, right? And
it was basically a Jacobin government.
Yeah, it was. Well, the thing is that Lincoln was, it's a little complicated because essentially Lincoln is a master politician. Lincoln is a man from the West. And, you know, of course, Illinois being the West at this time, Lincoln is a Westerner. He's very uncultured, of course. You hear this constantly about him. He's very much a politician, you know, who, like, you know, he sort of doesn't even have any pretenses about not being a politician, to a level that, like, the Yankees considered a little antisocial. Also, he's an anti-slavery man and not an abolitionist. Mm-hmm. As an anti-slavery man, he basically believes that slavery is bad because black people are bad.
Correct.
That is the normal view out west. Basically, we need to, you know, that's the, like, Wilmot Proviso view. We need to, you know, this is why Oregon, you know, has a constitution which bans African Americans. Or I think they amended it at some point.
Finally.
They're now welcome in Oregon, just to be clear. If you're African American, you are welcome in Oregon. You know, but basically they were like, free soil for free men. We don't want to compete with slave labor. Right? It's actually economically a very straightforward. It's essentially the same thing as keep South Africa, you know, white for, you know, right? Workers of for the workers of the world, right? And it's completely unpalatable and unacceptable to, like, modern tastes. So it sort of tries to be retconned out. And what you don't realize is that basically the whole national discourse around the start of the Civil War is the South basically accusing the North of starting this war to have an abolitionist crusade to wipe out slavery, to, you know, mix the races. It was called amalgamationism back then. They were going to mix the races and make them equal. And they could point to a lot of people in Boston saying exactly that. Now, the people in Boston who were saying exactly that were not running the government. And in fact, basically, Lincoln and all the people who are running the government are denying up and down that this is the purpose of the war. This is, in fact, a nationalist war against these traitors who have betrayed the sacred American nationalist, whatever, right? And their supporters in England, which is considerably more woke at this time, are just like, wait, we want to support this war, because in England, they're just abolitionists, right? They're not American nationalists in England. They're like, we want to support this war for the right reason, but instead you're doing all this strange, weird national fascist shit. And you're like, we're not doing this to wipe out slavery. In fact, we're guaranteeing slavery. Like, you know, this war is not about slavery. And the South is like, yeah, it is about slavery. Right? And so the and this is why when people look at the Emancipation Proclamation, which is worded in this clever way to be like, oh no, we're not abolishing slavery. It's just a kind of technical measure to, only in the revolting states. In Delaware, you're totally fine. Just keep on whipping those slaves all you want, ancestors of the Bidens. But sorry, that was a low blow. I really don't.
but a true one.
Well, who knows if Biden's ancestors owned slaves? But I mean, Delaware is a slave state, and the man is from Delaware. You know, maybe that's enough. Then maybe that meets the right wing standard of factuality. I would hope that someone would have researched that, but you never know. He's from Pennsylvania. That's right. He's from Scranton, and then he moved. Yeah. They never had slaves in Pennsylvania.
No.
Not for quite some time.
Not really.
Sorry, that's fake news, guys. No, but Biden's ancestors were slaveholders. Story fake news. Don't believe a word of it. In any case,
that's an unverified claim, Curtis.
That's an unverified claim, right? That's misinformation. This is going to be flagged on Facebook, right? So in any case, fact checkers, do your duty. In any case, so the Emancipation Proclamation has this sort of weird position where you're basically saying, hey, you guys down south, all the time you said this war was about emancipation. You're right. So they were trying not to do that, which is why they basically, that's number one, why this is considered courageous. Yeah. You notice that, it was courageous in the same way as Obama going back on gay marriage. Yeah. Where he's basically like, no, actually, all those times I said a marriage was between a man and a woman. Yeah. I didn't mean it the way you thought I meant it, right? And of course, all the libs who heard Obama say that were like, oh yeah, he's just lying. He's just lying to the crowd. That's cool. Yeah. And which is a really disgusting thing to think, to be honest. I mean, it's a way of thinking that makes you complicit in this kind of Orwellian rule, right? And this is what is going on with the Emancipation Proclamation, where it's basically saying, okay, we're kind of effectively going to make it a holy crusade against slavery, like you said it was, but we're not going to admit that we're doing that. But it's going to be enough like that it's going to make our supporters in Britain and Massachusetts really, really happy.
This is a brilliant observation. I had never put these two together. I mean, I absolutely agree with you and always have on the Civil War and World War II. But to put them together, so in both cases, there was a post hoc rationalization for the war, which was racial.
Yes, right? Which was
racial racial justice and war. But in both cases, they were launched by the United States, essentially, or entered into by the United States for completely different reasons, essentially for control.
Yes, they were launched basically, and the public story that was told was a nationalist story. Yes. And so, one of the things that was constantly done in this nationalist story, this is one of the great tactics of the strong, is I didn't come up with this. Someone on a chat board came up with this, but it's so brilliant that I keep using it. Is kick the dog until it bites, then call it a mad dog and shoot it. Yeah. Right. And so you're basically, like the example of this that most people know about is Japan before World War II, where Japan, the US is like, hey, Japan, you think you can be a colonial power too? You think you're a great power? You're as good as Europe. Well, guess what? New world, no great powers anymore. We're going to have an international community. Mm-hmm. You can be part of our international community, or hey, guess what? Where your oil? Oh, you don't have any oil wells. Oh, sorry. Sucks to be you, right? Sorry, bucktooth monkey, right? And that was basically, essentially the way that the Japanese were treated, at the start of World War II. And there's sort of, this very proud national power is given a choice between, basically, it's like, you're going to be our little bucktooth monkey from now on, or we're going to shoot you, right? And so, like, they knew perfectly well what the response to that was going to be. They weren't stupid, right? Mm-hmm. But the thing is, the Americans who see Pearl Harbor, of course, just see, wow, we just got raided out of nowhere by these dangerous little bucktooth monkeys. We'd better, settle that and, basically create a Pacific Ocean free from bucktooth monkeys. Right. So, what they thought based on what they were shown was sort of perfectly logical, but they don't see us kicking Japan under the table, right? And so, essentially, the Confederates are presented with this thing where basically Seward, who's the Secretary of State, is swearing up and down to the Confederate commissioners that, this is just a technical problem, this thing with Fort whatever, we're going to resolve it, we're going to whatever. We're certainly not going to resupply and fortify Sumter and Pickens, right? Then they go and fortify Sumter and Pickens, they're doing this to an honor culture. Right, they're basically giving them this, and Lincoln is like, oh, Seward's speaking for himself. I'm making promises, right? And like these guys are getting the fucking runaround. This is like used car dealer stuff, right? And so basically, what they're doing is they're giving these proud aristocrats of the South this choice between basically going to war or like slinking home with their tails between their legs and being humiliated. Mm-hmm. And like they know what's going to happen here, and to a certain extent you're like, okay, could I plot a better course through this for the South or for Japan or for whoever? Yeah, you probably could. You certainly could. I think many historians agree that if the South had actually, sort of strapped their balls on in 1850 and seceded then, they could have done it. But in 1850, secession was an extremist nutcase fire eater position. In 1850, Jefferson Davis was a staunch Unionist, right? And he's a Unionist until I think late in the 1850s.
Sure.
Right. And in the end, it's those moderates who end up running the war and losing it. It's not the fire eaters.
That's right. Because they were made into fire eaters by
they were basically made into fire eaters. I mean, the thing that made, most of the South into the fire eaters was, this amazing realization after, John Brown did a lot of it, because in his Harper's Ferry raid, not only did he show that this like crazy terrorist thing could happen, he showed actually most of the North actually supported it.
Yep.
And then they were like, okay, all this like denying that this abolitionism thing is real or like significant or whatever, or like out to kill us or out to go like full Haiti on our asses. Like, you guys want to go full Haiti on our asses, right? And Haiti for the South was literally like the Holocaust. Right, it basically Southerners responded to the example.
Oh yes,
specifically the extermination of whites, by Dessalines in Haiti in I think 1804. They basically, to them it was like the Holocaust to a Jew. Totally. It was basically like, this is how we will be killed with all of our families. That's right. And so when it was like these proud, the Jefferson Davises of the world basically finally give it up in 1858, and they're basically like, this is how, well, okay, fine, fuck, we got to do this, right? Even when they do it, they're still not thinking big enough. And so, when you look at one of the reasons why, the South loses the war, many historians will observe that when they win the Battle of Bull Run, there's basically no organized forces between their victorious army and the Canadian border, right? And the thing is, but that is not at all, they're not actually thinking. You might have heard the term slave power conspiracy, this famous book by David Bryan Davis. Oh, yeah. There is no slave power conspiracy. The slave, and the Confederates are not at all thinking, oh, we need to conquer Boston and establish like indigo plantations, in the Back Bay. Like that is not at all their mentality. But they should have. But they should have, right? Well, the thing is, I wouldn't put it, I wouldn't go as far as the indigo plantations.
From their own point of view, that would have
from their own point of view, basically,
you've written that.
From their own point of view, their error was to think they made a couple of very large strategic errors. One of which was the whole King Cotton hypothesis. The other of which was essentially their thinking after the Battle of Bull Run was that this is the battle. The first battle of Bull Run, of course, was that this is the battle that has secured our independence. They were basically smoking their own bullshit, to mix a metaphor, and it's a very pungent metaphor. They were smoking their own bullshit, like many parties who lose a war, they lost the war because they were smoking their own bullshit. I'm sorry, Confederates, I'm telling it like it is. Their mindset after the Battle of Bull Run is, we proud Southern horsemen have driven off the Yankee rabble, and we've proved that we have a real nation now, and now it is time for our statesmen to sit down and negotiate articles of peace between these two nations that share one great continent. Right. They actually thought this, right? And and instead they should have thought, basically, we could walk to Washington right now.
Yeah, that's right.
They could have. Right. And there was never a time again when they could have done that. And Hitler makes the same mistake. There are many schools of thought, including different schools of thought prescribed by Hitler himself, as to why he allows the British to evacuate Dunkirk. Some believe that it was a mere military mistake. Others believe that Hitler had diplomatic reasons for it. Yeah. I believe that the burden of proof lies with those who say that Hitler didn't have diplomatic reasons for it, because throughout his career, he wanted
the Brits to be their ally.
Yes, he articulates this geopolitical vision in which, Germany is the master of Europe and Britain is the master of the seas, and they get along. He envisions a multipolar order.
That's right.
His enemies do not envision a multipolar.
With the United States. He wanted the United States and Britain and Germany to co-manage the world.
Yeah, he envisions a multipolar order. Strangely, his enemies do not envision a multipolar order. They have what is sometimes called the grand design. Ironically, what does the world end up with after the war? a bipolar order,
Right.
and you can read people basically, arguing for going to war with Germany in like 1939, and basically what they're saying is you could never have a Cold War. Like a Cold War would be absolutely like. They're describing the Cold War. They're not using the terms, but they're describing the situation in which the Eastern, basically the hemispheres are hostile to each other, and they're just like, this would be awful, and eventually they would send fleets to conquer us. Right. And of course, in 40, in the fall of France, there's all of this rhetoric going around. If you read like the American press as France is falling, of course, these are people that have been. These are the people that are, the liberals and not the communists. Of course, the communists are on Molotov-Ribbentrop break. But the people, those are not the people who are really running the show. The people who are really running the show are the Atlanticists. They're the people who got this war started. And of course, they're desperate to get into it. And, just as they, we were talking about the milk in the bodega, right? They're basically like, and you see all of these, like George Marshall is in the press making this argument. All of these like really subsequently respected military and diplomatic figures are like, now Hitler is master of France. And because he is master of France, he's master of Africa. Look at this map. As master of France, Hitler will be master of Dakar. Now from Dakar to Rio de Janeiro is only a short hop. At that point, Panzer divisions are on our continent. Correct. At that point, our boys will begin to start thinking about how they will have to die to defend the Rio Grande against Hitler's panzer divisions moving up from the south in armored spearheads, right? And the thing is that, of course, anyone who's read the history of World War II and recalls what it took to get across the English fucking Channel is basically just like, yeah, of course you can secure the fucking Atlantic, right?
They had no landing craft. The German.
It's like, I mean, of course, the U.S. does invade North Africa in 42, but it's completely unopposed, and they have mastery of the seas, right? Yep. And so, but the thing is, there's sort of all of this rhetoric, which I'm sure, to give it the devil's advocate, is rhetoric that would, if Hitler really is the master of Europe, does he like, well, I like this multipolar order thing, but, let's go for the whole thing. Does that strike you as something that would be impossible for Hitler to come up with? No, it does not. And so in the end, there is a kind of wisdom there. There is a kind of foresight in the American establishment in the first half of the 20th century that somebody's going to conquer the world and it better be us. And I think that that's sort of the most credit that I can give these guys in their sort of like, career of world domination. But, if you look who basically, like, if you look at any war between an order that wants to be a unipolar order and an order that wants to be a multipolar order, unambiguously, without a doubt, the cause of that war is the unipolar order. Because at any time, let's say in the Civil War, the North could have been like, okay, fine, just have your fucking country. We don't care. Fuck you. Fuck you and your fucking slavery bullshit, man. I'm just like laughing at how stupid this is. Go get the fuck away. And that was actually one of the ironies of the war, is that secession in the 1850s was actually an abolitionist position. Right? And, it's like Horace Greeley wrote this famous line. He's like, hate's polluted rag. That's right. He's talking about the American flag, right? That's right. And so, the Confederates are, of course, constantly taunting the Unionists with all of this secessionist rhetoric that came out of their own asshole in the 1850s, right? And so, it's really, like many wars, it's really a very ironic conflict. And it's just like severely sick and fucked up in all directions. And, to teach it as a holy crusade or a comic book is just like, it's unforgivable.
I agree.
And all right, let's get back to the present. We were in the present.
So you
wanted to talk about the election too.
Yeah. So you wrote a very fascinating blog post on Graymere on Substack. I think it was just after the election, in which you discuss Machiavelli and you discuss the prospect of election fraud, and you have a lot of interesting things to say in there, many of which I had to think very hard to understand. So I'd like to fully understand that piece and your thinking on.
Well, what happened? I've actually written two election pieces. One that was the one that came out recently also. So if you look for Victus on Grey Mirror, you'll find
I saw that. Yeah,
a sequel to that. But you know, I've been.
So tell us about Machiavelli.
Tell us about Machiavelli. Well, you know, the what I said about the election, and I was saying, I didn't say this publicly, but because it just seemed tacky, but I was saying this to people publicly before the election, is that the optimal result would be for Biden to win, but for it to look like fraud. Yeah. You know, we just got an absolutely spectacular case of that. And
well, it depends on who you ask. I mean,
it depends on who you ask. You know, the thing is, anyone you ask has to admit that basically people went to bed on Tuesday night looking like Trump was going to win, and they woke up after some strange midnight news with it looking like Biden was going to win.
So, Curtis, I am virtually convinced that there was massive electoral fraud. I, though, have been getting nothing but side eyes, even from my political friends.
Oh yes. Well, the thing is, I've like. The convinced isn't quite the term that I would use. I would say that the matter has been not seriously investigated in any really serious or effective way, that there are many, many red flags. This is what forensic accountants do. There's a wonderful thread somewhere from like people who are like forensic accountants and shit, and being like, are there red flags here? Sure, there are plenty of red flags. You know, the biggest red flag is simply the and I discussed this in my latest piece. You know, your biggest red flag is simply the turnaround in the professional bet making odds. Because professional bet makers in prediction markets, these are reasonably deep and liquid prediction markets now. Deep markets don't move for stupid reasons.
Yeah, that's right.
And the you know, look at the way like a betting market flows during the course of an NBA game. You know, the team that was supposed to be ahead by 10 points is behind by 10 points. They don't panic. They know that leads change a lot in NBA games. Right. So going into the election, the prediction markets are at roughly 15% Trump, 85% Biden. And then they receive about that, I think. I don't know the exact numbers. Then they receive, and that's sort of matching, that's kind of discounting the polls. The polls would show a much more uneven result, right? The polls showed it as virtually certain. And so they go into that with that expectation. Right. And then they see that the numbers are coming out differently. And in fact, you know, Florida, which has actually basically safe and effective elections, is actually like, you know, being rapidly won by Trump. And so the numbers reverse and it goes to 85% Trump, 15% Biden.
And you're talking about like by midnight of the election.
Yeah. By midnight. By midnight, it was at 85-15. I wasn't betting on it, but you know, I was talking to people who were betting on it.
Right.
You know, because I was obviously in an election night party taking COVID risks and getting blasted. Because I mean, you know, it's a dangerous disease, but you only live once. I don't justify it ideologically, unlike some people. In any case, these, you know, the famous pause happens. You know, the distribution of mail-in ballots, rapidly decreases. You know, of course, all these affidavits saying, "Oh yeah, I saw stacks of unfolded mail-in ballots, right? Pre-printed unfold mail-in ballots. Those are some of the best affidavits." But something happens, and we know something happens because the odds reverse again. And they reverse again in favor of the eventual winner. And so something surprised this market. There was some information out there that this market does not know. Right? And the fact that now, you know, because these markets, like, you know, they know like what precincts are supposed to report when or what precincts haven't reported. Like stupid shit like that does not, like, you know, stupid like Chiron statistics that, you know, the media is running on these Chiron statistics and mean absolutely jack shit all night. That doesn't mean anything to these prediction markets, right? They were basically looking at the returns and they were like, you know, these are our numbers, our kind of demographic numbers for where Trump needs to be to win this. You know, these numbers are clearly coming through, and then they weren't coming through, right? And the that surprise is interesting. That surprise is, of course, a red flag. Red flag doesn't necessarily mean anything, right? And then you're like, the way I run through it in my latest posts is I'm like, okay, let's suppose you're investigating a potential crime, or you're an investigator. You're looking for things to investigate. The first thing you need to investigate is some kind of supposition that something happened here. Like, was there an event? You don't go on fishing expeditions. You don't investigate non-crime.
Like fame?
Okay, so you're basically, you look at this and you're like, has something funny happened here that has never happened before in my experience? Yes, I've watched a number of, I'm a grown man. I've watched a number of elections, and I've never seen anything like this.
Me too.
Right? So that's interesting. Of course, it's a very funny year. Everything's different. You never know what's happening. But the thing is that when you look at things, you see a bunch of flags like this. So, you have sort of two questions. There's actually two basically paths of, ways of being fraud pilled. You can be on election machines, you can be a Dominion fraud pilled guy, or you can be a mail-in ballots fraud pilled guy. I'm mostly a mail-in ballots fraud pilled guy, and here's why.
Me too.
Because basically, when you're looking to investigate a crime, you basically, in like detective Hercule Poirot land, I believe Agatha Christie came up with this one. There's the three-legged stool of crime. There's motive, propensity, and opportunity. Right. So basically,
motive is off the charts.
Motive is off the charts actually for two reasons. Number one, do they want to win this election? Yes. But the more interesting question in motive is, do they want to win this election by any means necessary? And when you look at the mindset of the lib, okay, let's investigate, we got to know our enemy here.
Yeah.
Let's investigate the lib. Does the lib think that it would be the right thing to do to basically engage in, a little paper shenanigans to save the world from orange HIPAA?
Yes, indeed they do.
Yes,
because that's what they do. Because that's what they did for 3 years before the election.
And yes, that's what they did for 3 years before the election.
Yes.
Of course, the lib is hypocritical. We've discussed this. And the lib is also a great believer in what philosophers know as consequential ethics, which means basically the means justify the ends, right? And
Ooh, nice.
and so exactly. Whereas the poor Khan is wedded to his world of deontological ethics, and he will stay at his duty until the the volcanic eruption leaves him frozen at his post, basically.
Wow.
And that's how he does, right?
He's
and
far too honorable.
And so he's far too honorable, and so the motive is pretty solid here. Then we look at propensity. Are there maybe like big city political machines in the Democratic Party? Do they have political organizers? Do they have they stolen elections in the lives of those now living that are now known because they were known only after the fact?
Right.
I'm hearing yes, and yes, right? If you want to convince me that this is a wolf that has somehow reformed itself, tell me how, why, and when, and who reformed it. I don't see any reform at all. I see that actually there used to be people who were putting leashes on the wolves, and now there aren't.
There was a judge in Pennsylvania, I think near Philadelphia, who was convicted earlier this year, before the election, of election fraud, and he was in charge of the election.
In these races?
Well, naturally, if you're going to employ the fox in the henhouse,
my God,
you might as well hire him as the chief rooster, right? And
Any tips?
He'll certainly do an excellent job of keeping all other foxes out of your henhouse. And
right.
So we see propensity. Then we see opportunity. Okay.
Fast. Got it.
Is there anything in the United States that involves counting people
It'll
that
show
works?
you the route. You be driving.
Like that, or don't forget, this is the country where you establish your identity to the DMV with a utility bill, right? This is this is a country which has actively worked in every possible way, not only not to have no voter security, but also to have no citizenship security.
Wow.
the idea of, oh, I'm going to send out these absentee ballots that are, I mean, is there any process in America that you know of that like successfully checks signatures? Like, you know, like, I mean, the whole thing is just like, it's this sort of it's this kind of scientific pretense where you're just like, actually, once, you know, you mail out 100 million absentee ballots, half of which get thrown in the recycling God knows where, and you accept any scrawl that comes in as a signature because my signature is a fucking scrawl, you know, and like, how would you actually, come on, how would you actually filter signatures and tens of millions of absentee ballots? It's ridiculous. It could never even happen, right? There's just this pretense that this mechanism exists. And so you've already decided that, you know, this is this, you know, the analogy that I used actually, you know, first of all, the thing that I say in my second election post is that, you know, if the election was stolen, it was stolen fair and square. You know, and the analogy that I used for an American election, which is sort of intentionally left unsecured like this, is an analogy. I don't know this firsthand, so maybe I'm embroidering the analogy, but it's the analogy of water polo. So I don't know how much you know about water polo, but it's a sport. They throw balls into nets in the water.
Yeah,
you know,
I know that. Yeah.
Right. But the thing about water polo, of course, it's a sport. It's not war.
Claire, you
There's a
coming?
referee.
I'm already here.
But the thing is,
Great.
here's the thing about water polo: the referee
Right on.
is above the water.
Wait, hold on.
They don't have like underwater video assistant referees or anything.
Right. So that's where all the
referee
cheating,
is above
all the
the
cheating
water.
goes on underneath.
Right. So basically, anything that you do under the water is fair game. So these guys are twisting each other's balls all afternoon.
That's right.
Right. You know, and so the thing is that if you're playing a game of water polo and you choose to regard your game of water polo as a game of rules water polo above the water, you're going to lose.
Yep.
You have to be down there twisting balls, or you have to basically get a referee under the water. And so the thing is that what's interesting is that this reality makes the election
Good to see you.
actually sort of more real than it pretends to be, because it's not just a contest
Give
of
me my
counting
take when we
heads.
cross the finish.
It's a contest. It's also a
Right, we
contest
arrive
of
in one
twisting
piece.
balls. And the thing is, the whole premise of a democratic election
I'll
is
go heavy on the
whoever can
throttle.
muster the most heads
NC badges
is
are-
going to be the one who's going to win in a civil war. So we should just let them rule instead of having the civil war.
Right.
Very sensible kind of game theory perspective.
Okay.
But the more sort of realistic, you know, if instead of just counting heads, you're actually counting the ability to be effective in this kind of ball twisting election fight, then you're basically like, yeah, actually the strong have earned the mandate of heaven here.
Okay.
You know, and what this election has shown is that Donald John Trump should not be president for another 4 years, because he easily could have ripped these guys' balls off, and he failed to do so. And you, his bosses, the American people, should hold him responsible for that. You should hold him responsible for failing to drain the deep state. You shouldn't be like, you know, the thing is that I hate to say it, you know, now as we're coming to the end of Trump's term, I'm more comfortable criticizing him. And, you know, what I would say to the American people, it's a very kind of, it's really I'm not a pickup artist, I'm a happily married man, but it's really a pickup artist message, is that, you know, like, you've had this wild fling with Trump. Okay, you're like this homely girl who has never been kissed, and you had this incredible 4-year affair. Or like you're this like ugly virgin dude who's never gotten laid.
Exactly.
You now you know what real politics is like. Now you know what it feels like to fuck. Okay? But you know, you can bleep that if you want. But
Never.
Now you feel what it knows like to fuck. But you know what? Basically, to say that you're a player would be going too far. And you've taken the first step toward becoming a player. Okay, but now, you know, what you have to struggle with is not your previous problem, which was just abject virginity. Now you have to struggle with your new problem, which is one-itis. Not only do you have one-itis, you have one-itis for, if you'll pardon my sexism, this dumpy old bag who's like a 3. Okay, so you've actually gone from being like a virgin to being like this like beta orbiter cuck boyfriend kind of figure. Right, you know, for like this guy who's just not very impressive. He comes across really well. His substance is very weak. He has many good instincts. His ability, you pick the only CEO in America who didn't know how to be a fucking CEO.
Yeah, there's no discipline. He has no discipline.
He has no discipline because he runs a marketing organization. He doesn't run a hotel.
Right.
He licenses a brand, right? And this is it. There's a great line where from Mark Twain where he's like, the only kind of man I can trust is a man who can keep a hotel. Right. If you can keep a hotel, you can do anything. And I believe like anyone who's run a hotel would probably make a better president. Real president than most of these fucks, right? And because you got to deal with problems. Isn't there like a Gordon Ramsay style show about fixing your bad hotel? I'd take Gordon Ramsay as president in a second, right? He'd basically go into the State Department and be like, he'd check out their walk-in freezer, right?
Yeah,
he'd be like, wow, here are these rebels you've been supporting for 30 years. Are these rebels fresh? Are you serving them as fresh rebels?
Gordon Ramsay fits your politics perfectly, doesn't he?
Yeah, he does. He's not eligible, but that's just a detail. This whole eligibility thing is overblown. Listen, Americans, if you elect a guy who's not eligible and he takes power, do you think anybody's really going to stop him? You got to learn how this stuff actually works. And you can elect anyone you want. Not only that, you can do it at any time. You don't need to wait for an election. That's a little harder, but it's called people power. It's been mastered before. In any case, I don't know. So when I look at the election, I'm basically like, first of all, number one, they stole it fair and square if they stole it. And it certainly smells like they stole it. That's really all I've I'd love to see it investigated or researched by, in some, effective way. If I held my breath and started doing this, I would be dead. And so, in fact, it basically joins many other questions in history that will never be properly investigated. Can JFK ever be properly investigated? How would it, right? You're just going to have to leave that one as smells fishy, but maybe the official story is true, right? And with this election, I meant smells fishy, but maybe the official story is true. Because the best official story that you can come up with is actually one that the Lincoln Project and the Puck Republicans should be very happy with. Because the one thing that you do see that is the trend that, if anything, genuinely pushed them over the line, this did, is basically shaming Republican housewives into voting for Biden.
Oh, wow.
Shaming suburban Republican housewives into voting for Biden.
That's right.
Trump gets a positive shift in basically what we might euphemistically call the rap vote. And, basically this is a man, you can write a lot more raps about Trump than about Biden. And so,
and there have been many raps.
And there have been. Oh, absolutely. Many. Absolutely. Many. Absolutely. Well, Biden also ends in a feminine rhyme, Biden. So, that's a little harder to, but you could be riding with Biden, right? But you could do a bump with Trump. And that was counteracted by basically the Lincoln Project vote. The cuck Republican vote, because Biden did get a suburban cuck boost, right? So, that's really your best case, that and just the sort of weird data shape and the weird data irregularities of this symbolic shit show. Ridiculous. The thing is, you have a system that's going to produce irregularities no matter what, because it's a shambles. And if you will come and try to tell me that the shambles is secure to my face, if anyone is like, oh, it was the most secure election ever, it'd be like, oh, if it was secure, why do you even need election observers? Is it just cosmetic? Is there nothing that could be done if you could get the observers out of the room? Why are they there if this process is perfect?
Right. Why do we need them? Right.
Why do we need them? Right. And there is no security context in the world ever in which a system is ever proven secure by asking someone to prove it insecure instead. Oh, no. If you want to show that something is secure, you show that there is no possible way that someone could break into it. That's how it's done, okay? That's how, in the real world, it is done. And there's no conceivable way of doing that for this system, which is just appalling. Moreover, even once you've done that, you'll probably get hacked anyway.
Yeah.
Right? And so, to say, to say that the election was, someone emailed me after I read that post and was like, can't you just say that the election was stolen? And I'm like, I refuse to even say that there was an election, because at the levels of closeness that it was, you're just talking about a mechanism whose precision is ridiculously below the required precision. I mean, as it was, of course. I mean, don't forget that Trump in 2016 wins by like 15,000 votes in Michigan or something. And in fact, you have the fascinating story. I don't know if you checked out the story of the Jill Stein 2016 recount. Wikipedia has a very good page on it. Strangely, it happened without anyone being banned from Facebook. It was just an informed, rational discussion among scientists who had questions, right? And totally different tone to the affair. It founders in a number of ways, but one of the ways in which it founders is they go into Wayne County and they discover that in Wayne County, the pieces of paper they have in the ballot boxes basically bear no relationship to the number of votes that were tabulated.
Oh my.
So they're like, they have one precinct where, they were like, the way the New York Times story puts it is great. They were like, 300 people voted, but only 60 ballots were found in the ballot boxes. So they must have been put somewhere else. So like to even dignify the shit show with the label of, to imagine that it has this sort of ritual sanctity, is something that, like, I'm sorry, I can't take that seriously. So, like, I refuse, to say the election was stolen is to take the election too seriously. That's my position. But the thing that election did was basically just show you, it's like, COVID has just shown you all of these sort of cracks in the narrative, and the election certainly helped with that. That's point one. Point two is, as a Machiavellian,
there we go.
What is good? Well, they asked Genghis Khan the question, and his answer was, see that your enemies crushed and driven before you, and to hear the lamentations of that woman, right? So, basically, is Machiavelli
Don't jinx it.
Yeah, he's going to agree with it in a somewhat more sophisticated way. Okay. What Machiavelli is going to tell you is that, at least if you want power, if you don't want power, you shouldn't care. But, if you basically feel that it is important for your side, for whatever